Imagine sneaking out late at night just to catch a glimpse of an alligator in the swamp. You're with your cousin and everything seems fine until you notice a man standing still, watching you. He's not just standing there, he's waiting. And suddenly he turns, not his head, but his whole body. What would you do next? It had become a tradition for our family to visit my aunt and uncle in Fort Myers, Florida, every winter. It was always a brief escape from the brutal cold back home. We'd been doing this for nearly 15 years, so I'd grown up visiting them, especially spending time with my cousin, Ashley, who was only a year older than me. Despite the age difference and the fact she was a girl, we always had fun. She was adventurous and down for anything, which made our visits memorable. One winter evening, after a big family dinner, we sat in the living room watching a movie. The adults retreated to the kitchen afterward, drinking wine and chatting. Ashley, always the thrill seeker, suggested we sneak out to check out the nearby canal. Rumors had been swirling about a huge alligator spotted there, and the idea of seeing it in the wild was irresistible. I hesitated at first, but she convinced me it would be fine. Slipping out the back door unnoticed, we headed toward the canal, stopping by a local 7-Eleven to grab snacks. The cashier eyed us suspiciously, warning us to be careful. The streets were eerily quiet, and as we continued walking, the area became more swampy. It felt like we were miles from civilization. Then Ashley stopped dead in her tracks. Ahead, in the faint light of a distant street lamp, a man stood on the sidewalk, completely still. His motionless figure was unsettling. He wasn't walking, fidgeting, or doing anything, just standing there. We whispered nervously, debating whether to keep going, but it was the only way to reach the canal without wading through muddy yards. As we approached, the man turned around, not just his head but his entire body swiftly facing us. My heart skipped a beat. Then, without warning, he raised his arm and began to wave. Only it wasn't a friendly wave. His arm moved exaggeratedly, as though beckoning us to come closer. Terror surged through me. Ashley and I bolted, sprinting back the way we came, our breaths ragged and panicked. We finally stopped to catch our breath in front of a small house, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Ashley mentioned that the area was known for having its share of weirdos. Now I understood why her parents didn't let her out at night. But just as we started to calm down, we saw him again. He was at the end of the street, standing still under a street lamp, his face illuminated. His features were more visible now, a man in his 40s with slicked back hair and a bent, crooked nose. He was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile, it was sinister. And once again, he waved. I foolishly waved back, thinking it would make him stop, but the smile vanished from his face. Within seconds, he broke into a full sprint toward us. Ashley screamed, and we ran like our lives depended on it, darting through yards, jumping over fences, and scrambling to get back to her house. When we finally reached the back door, it was locked. We banged on it, desperate to get in, without alerting our parents to our escape. When we finally got inside, we made up a story about going to 7-Eleven for snacks. Ashley's parents were furious, mine not so much. But that night, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face under the streetlight, his wave, and the eerie way he seemed to appear wherever we went. It was supposed to be a normal summer night. Just me and my friends sneaking out for a walk. No big deal, right? But when a car stopped in the middle of the road and two men got out holding a metal rod, everything changed. That's when we realized this was no ordinary night. It was one of those warm summer nights, and my two best friends and I wanted to make the most of it. School was about to start, and we didn't want to spend our last free night stuck indoors. So, we came up with a plan to sneak out and walk to the local high school. We lived in a small town in Massachusetts, where everything was close by and the streets were deserted after midnight. Around 12 a.m., we snuck out, laughing and goofing off as we made our way to the school. The walk was peaceful, and we had the road all to ourselves, walking down the middle like we owned it. When we reached the high school, we sprawled out on the turf field, gazing up at the stars and reminiscing about the summer. After an hour, we decided it was time to head back home. As we approached a T intersection, we noticed a car parked at the stop sign, its headlights illuminating the road. It was strange because no other cars were out at this hour. We kept walking, assuming the driver was just idling for some reason. But as we got closer, the car slowly rolled into the intersection and turned toward us. It was an old white Mustang, and as it passed, one of my friends made a stupid comment about the car being a V6, mocking it. We laughed briefly until the car suddenly screeched to a stop. Panic hit us like a wave. The car made a sharp U-turn and started speeding back toward us. "Run!" I yelled, and we took off down the street. We darted into the woods, trying to stay hidden among the trees. My heart was pounding, and my legs were shaking as I crouched behind a tree, praying the driver wouldn't find us. The car slowed to a crawl as it passed, and then two large men got out. One of them was holding a metal rod. My breath caught in my throat as they started walking toward the tree line. The man with the rod shouted threats into the woods, his voice filled with anger. My friends and I stayed as quiet as possible, terrified they would find us. They searched for what felt like hours, but eventually, one of the men grumbled, "Forget it, let's go, there'll be others out." They got back in the car, and the Mustang roared off down the road. We stayed hidden for several more minutes before finally emerging from the woods. We ran the rest of the way home, our hearts still racing. We tried to laugh it off later, but deep down, we knew how close we had come to something terrible. 2 days later, we found out that a white Mustang had been involved in a robbery in a nearby town. It was the same night we were chased. At 16, I had a strict curfew, midnight on weekends. My friend Jose was luckier. He had no curfew at all. One Saturday night in 2013, Jose called me, eager to explore an abandoned hospital across town. It was a creepy, fenced-off building that no one had bothered to tear down. I had never snuck out before, but the thrill of an adventure was too tempting. I quietly slipped out of the house, grabbed my bike, and met Jose. We rode through the dark streets until we reached the hospital. It was a tall, brick building, ominous in the moonlight. We hid our bikes in some bushes and hopped the fence. After scouting the perimeter, we found a basement window already broken open. Jose went in first, and I followed, my heart racing with excitement and fear. The basement was dark, but with our flashlights, we could see it was mostly used for storage. We found a staircase and made our way to the main floor. To our surprise, some of the hospital lights were still on, casting eerie shadows in the hallways. We explored room after room, finding nothing but empty spaces and remnants of old equipment. But then we came across one door that was locked. All the other doors had been open, so this was unusual. We heard faint thumping sounds from the other side. Curious, we went into the adjacent room and found a small hole in the wall. I crouched down to look through the hole, and my blood ran cold. In the room was a woman in a long white dress, standing against the far wall, staring at the door. I whispered to Jose to take a look. He didn't believe me until he peered through the hole and gasped. We debated whether to leave, but Jose wanted to stay and investigate further. I looked through the hole one last time, and that's when I saw her face, inches from mine. She had knelt down and was staring directly at me through the hole, her lips twisted into a wide, terrifying smile. I screamed, and we both bolted out of the room, racing back to the basement window. I was so scared that I half expected her to grab my legs as I crawled out. We grabbed our bikes and pedaled as fast as we could back to Jose's house. I went home immediately, shaken and terrified. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't explain what I had seen.